Hello, this is the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Thank you so much for tuning into this video in which we'll look at experimental probability. So last lesson we looked at theoretical probability, which is the fraction of times we expect something to happen. So for example, you know if you toss a coin, the probability of getting a heads is a half. That means that if I toss a coin over and over again, I expect to get heads half of the time. Of course, that might not actually happen. If I toss a coin 20 times, I might not get 10 heads and 10 tails. I could get 12 heads and 8 tails, or 7 heads and 13 tails. Experimental probability is the fraction of times something actually happened. So let's look at this example. Let's say I roll a normal six-sided die 50 times and I rolled 10 sixes. The theoretical probability of rolling a 6 is still 1 over 6 because the die has 6 possible outcomes. One of those outcomes is a 6. 1 out of the 6 faces on a die has a 6 on it. So that means if I roll a normal six-sided die heaps and heaps of times, I expect to roll a 6 1/6 of the time. But in this particular experiment, the experimental probability is just 10 out of 50, the number of times it happened divided by the total number of trials. And of course, that simplifies to 1 over 5. So in this experiment, I got a 6 actually 1/5 of the time. So 1/5 is slightly more than a 6th. There's no reason the theoretical and experimental probabilities have to be equal. So theoretical, fraction of times that I thought it was going to happen, and this is the fraction of times it actually happened. So let's look at this question. So when I spun a spinner 80 times, landed on red 40 times, green 20 times, blue 16, and yellow 4 times. What did it most likely look like? So what happened is when I spun the spinner, it landed on red 40 out of 80, which is half the time. It landed on green 20 out of 80, a quarter of the time. It landed on blue a 1/5 of the time, and yellow 1/20th of the time. So all those numbers I gave you are experimental probabilities. The experimental probability of a red was a half. It happened half the time. So that does not necessarily mean that the theoretical probability was a half. It doesn't mean that this circle, the spinner, had half red. But it does mean it's most likely that the spinner had half red. So because I got red half the time, it's likely that half the spinner was red. Because I got green 1/4 of the time, it's likely that the green occupied a quarter of the spinner. So then blue and yellow would make up this quarter of the circle. So blue happened 4 times as much as yellow. So I'm just estimating here that this area is about 4 times that. So we probably had something like the blue taking up about this much and yellow taking up the rest. So once again, this is just what is most likely. Just because I landed on red half the time, it doesn't necessarily mean half the spinner was red. This is just most likely what the spinner looked like. All right, thank you so much for tuning into this video. This has been the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Have a great day.